Educator guest lecture series, and today we're really lucky to have Peter Buckley, who is the former Oregon state representative and is currently running Southern Oregon Success, which works to build awareness about the impact of adverse childhood experiences on ourselves and people in the community. So I'm really glad to have you, Peter. I just wanted to share that the mission statement for the Center for Cognitive Diversity is to celebrate the different ways people learn and to create environments that heal and empower. And each month we have someone come on to share real life examples of what that looks like in action. And one thing I was just going to introduce before we get started are what are the 6 principles of trauma-informed care when we talk about trauma-informed work. And so those principles are safety, both physical and emotional, having trustworthiness and transparency, the concept of empowerment, collaboration, choice, and then they've added a 6th principle, which is social justice, looking at those cultural, gender, racial, and historical factors that we need to disrupt in order to promote trauma-informed communities. So thank you so much. All right, Peter, so we'd love to hear about the work that you're doing. We've had some people introduced, so as people get on the call, in the beginning, if you want to say hi, and then at the end of the call, if you come on while Peter's speaking, at the end of the call, you can share questions. Someone join us? I don't recognize the number.
Is a 510 area code.
Yeah. Well, whoever.
Merle.
Hi, Merle.
It's Merle.
Welcome to the call, Merle.
Okay.
If you want to introduce yourself, just say what your role is in the school and where are you at? What city?
Okay, so I'm in West Contra Costa Unified School District. I was in a CEC, Counseling and Enriched Classroom, last year, and this year I'm doing home instruction in Gateway to College.
Okay, so she's in El Cerrito, California. And I see Bonnie has entered the call. Welcome, Bonnie.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, I am here. Sorry I'm late.
No problem. If you people are just saying their name, what their role is, and what city and state they're in.
Okay, I'm Bonnie King, and I'm from Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I work for the University of Arkansas in the teacher preparation program for kindergarten through 6th grade certification.
Okay, well, welcome.
Thank you.
So we'll get started, and yeah, we're just introducing Peter. So thank you, Peter, for being here. We'd love to hear about kind of what brought you to the work that you're doing and how it's kind of manifested and what you've been working
Sure,
towards.
I'll tell you a long and winding story about it all. Doing the work that we're doing now, I never anticipated doing it, but a lot of things in my life I never anticipated doing. My background's in theater. I spent 22 years working in West Coast theaters. I ran an actor training program in Northern California for a number of years. I ended up running for the legislature in the early 2000s, simply because I thought the direction our country was going in was insane, and I felt like I had to be more politically active. And I was elected to the Oregon House of Representatives, and I'm serving in the legislature, and the recession hits, and everything falls apart. And the Speaker of the House at the time decides that would be a great idea to appoint me to be the co-chair of the Joint Committee on Ways and Means, which is the budget committee for the legislature. I had no experience on the Ways and Means Committee, not a single day. The state budget was in free fall. People are panicking. They're talking about closing prisons. And so I got appointed to be the House co-chair for the budget. And I learned a tremendous amount going through that process. I learned a lot more than I ever did about early childhood education, about human services, about public safety, how things fit together. And during that process, there were a couple bills concerning trauma-informed practices that came through and had to come through the budget process as well. So I was trying to figure out exactly what those were all about. And Bob Lieberman, who was is now the former executive director of Kairos, mental health provider here in the Rogue Valley, he was in the Capitol building during the last month I was in the legislature. And he always was kind of my advisor on mental health issues. And so I saw him in the building. And I just asked him coincidentally, Bob, what's this bill now about trauma-informed practices in high schools? I thought trauma-informed practices were about, early childhood stuff. And Bob did one of those kind of face plants on his forehead saying, I've been telling you this for 10 years. It's not just about children, it's about all of us. So he made me read Bruce Perry's book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, and it changed the way I looked at everything. I was just floored by that book and the impact of trauma on development. And so I'm starting to get curious, more and more curious about what exactly this is. And the month after I left the legislature, I was hired to run Southern Oregon Success, which is a collaboration of all levels of education from early childhood, K-12, community college, university, all the healthcare folks. We have coordinated care organizations in Oregon that handle the Medicaid program. They're involved with this collaboration. All the mental health providers are part of this collaboration. Southern Oregon Pediatrics is part of this collaboration. All the human service organizations, all the public safety agencies, and all the workforce development people. So it's a very broad cross-sector collaboration that's taking place. So I'm hired to do this basically because I think I have a good understanding of each one of those sectors due to the experience I had working on the budget in the legislature. And interestingly enough, I'm not on the job very long at all before we get a call from ACE Interface, which is a national organization run by Dr. Robert Anda from the ACEs study, and Laura Porter, who was a former Washington state government official who spearheaded their efforts in Washington to do community-based intentional resilience work, building community capacity through the science of resilience. And they had been contracted by one of our local coordinated care organizations to actually bring ideas into our region about trauma-informed practices and using resilience to build community capacity. And they invited me to go train with them in Pendleton, Oregon, along with Bob Lieberman and about 5 other colleagues of ours, to spend a few days learning their curriculum, the NEAR curriculum, the neurobiology, epigenetics, the ACEs study, and resilience, so that we could present the curriculum in our community. And it's been an amazing ride. Again, I mentioned earlier, I never thought that I'd be doing this work. But from what I've learned, not only from the Bruce Perry literature, but also from Dr. Anda, Laura Porter, we had Dr. Bruce Goldberg here to do presentations in the region last year. I've really changed the way I look at everything and how I approach everything. And I'm 62 years old. I didn't expect to be saying that when I'm 62 years old. So we took the information from the NEAR curriculum from ACE Interface, and we began to do presentations with it. And it just caught on beyond anybody's expectations. Every school district wanted a training in it. All the early childhood providers wanted trainings in it. We have now done over 350 trainings since May of 2016 to over 12,500 people in Jackson and Josephine County in all sectors, across all sectors. And we're working now using that information, but also using basic tools of resilience to really focus on the core protective systems of resilience. We're working with every school district, all 11 of our local school districts. We're working with Rogue Community College and Southern Oregon University. They actually have resident training teams at Rogue Community College and Southern Oregon University. Southern Oregon University is determined to produce the next generation of trauma-informed employees across all sectors: educators, public safety personnel, human service personnel, counselors, etc. So it's caught on in a way that none of us quite imagined that it would, taking a life of its own in some ways. And what's been exciting is that once organizations, or even individuals, get the information, just as the ACE Interface folks told us, they start to come back to us and say, this is what we'd like to do with this information. Can you help us in this effort? So for example, the Jackson County Juvenile Justice Department, we did a training for them in July of 2016. We did a follow-up training, to do kind of refresher training with them. They started basically having just staff meetings to brainstorm on trauma-informed practices, and they've begun to transform what they do in juvenile justice. Their director, Joe Ferguson, is very clear on the fact that punishment does not work, and their job is to revitalize lives, and that with this information about trauma, toxic stress, and resilience, They've been given kind of the pathways to the root causes of what every kid that comes into juvenile justice is facing. Every kid coming into that facility is traumatized. So they are working in a different way. Just one example of how they changed their policies, just on strip searches. They have to strip searches when a kid is brought in to be put into their facility to make sure there's no drugs or weapons. But now, on the suggestion of one of the staff members, they'll have the kid take off his shirt first and be searched upper body for drugs and weapons. Then they let him put his shirt back on. So he's never standing naked, fully naked in front of anyone. Just that one little change. They've also shifted some of their policies around how the kids work and live in the facility. There's a lot more artwork going on. There's a huge mural being painted in the interior of the facility. They have to keep the facility lit 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's a correctional facility, but they had been giving the young people there sleep shades and earplugs if they behaved well during the day. And we were able to convince them that they might want to rethink that. Mm-hmm. If the kids who aren't behaving well get no sleep, how is that working for everybody? Yeah. So they've changed that policy now. So every young person gets sleep shades and earplugs. So they have a chance to get sleep and chance to have at least possibly a better next day. So policy changes on that level are happening in public safety in both counties. In education, it's been phenomenal. We've had, again, every district involved with us. We also had an experience with the PAX Good Behavior game. And I don't know if all of you have heard of the PAX Good Behavior game. And again, I'm telling these kind of winding stories. But the PAX Good Behavior game came into our region through the Phoenix Talent School District. And the reason that they were searching for things was that 2 of their high school students committed suicide almost back-to-back 4 years ago. And the superintendent of the school district went to her board and told her board that she had to find out what was happening to her kids. I mean, it's a small school district. She knew these kids, and she was devastated by the suicides. So she asked her school district to give her 3 years. Don't talk to her about graduation rates. Don't talk to her about test scores. Give her 3 years to find out what's happening to our kids. And to her school board's credit, they agreed. They said, do what you need to do. So she joined her district with 6 other school districts around the state to really just focus on that question for 1 month, 1 meeting every month for the year. What's happening with our kids? And they had presentations from Dr. Anda on the ACE study. They had presentations from a wide variety of people working in the field. And this presentation by Dr. Dennis Embry on the PAX Good Behavior game really impressed the superintendent. The PAX Good Behavior game was developed by a doctor who was hired by the Pentagon in 1990 to do a study on the impact of deaths on military families. What happens to children of military families when a dad or mom is killed in action? And he completed the study, and he was so blown away by the intensity of that loss for children, particularly children under the age of 5, and how that enormous loss leads to an inability to learn how to self-regulate, that he spent the next couple of years of his life developing a way that kids who have faced that kind of trauma in their lives can be helped to learn how to self-regulate. It's the PAX Good Behavior game, PAX. PAX is a Latin word meaning peace and prosperity. And it sounds so simplistic, but it works. He's got now close to 20 years of data that shows that children who have this PAX Good Behavior game in the classroom graduate at a far higher rate than other students, stay out of the criminal justice system at a far higher rate than other students, and just have better outcomes across the boards. And it's a fascinating program. It begins with the teacher asking the students, and in Phoenix Talent, they started with first grade classes, ask the first graders, what's the coolest classroom in the world? What's the classroom that they'd love to come to every day? And it's the students who define what that is, that there's music, that everyone takes turns, everybody has fun, etc. And that classroom, that coolest classroom in the world, is the PAX classroom. So, and the kids are all PAX leaders because they're the ones who design the classroom. And 2 or 3 times a day, every single day, they play the PAX Good Behavior game just as part of the regular school day. I went there to watch this in action a couple years back, and they were doing a spelling test in first grade. And as the teacher's giving the spelling test, if someone disrupts the class, it's a spleen against their team. Spleen is a word designed because you can't frown when you say it. Spleen. Everybody spleens. It's not a big deal. And if you get mad at one of your teammates because they spleen, then that's a spleen on you, right? So this game is teaching kids how to learn self-regulation every single day. And whichever team, they're divided into teams of 4, whichever team has the fewest spleens at the end of the spelling test, they get to pick a prize at a Granny's Wacky Prize Hat. The day I was there, the prize was you could make goofy faces at your classmates for 30 seconds. So that's what they did, make goofy faces. And then we'd laugh and they go back to work. They're all physical activities. All the prizes are physical activities. Like you get to do jumping jacks for 30 seconds. You get to roll around the floor like a worm for 30 seconds. The teacher told me their favorite was you get to make armpit farts for 30 seconds. And this seems so simple, but it works. They began this PACS Good Behavior game in March of 2016. And by June of 2016, classroom disruptions in their first grade classrooms had gone down by an average of 66%. So one of our healthcare providers looked at that data and made the realization that people who are good at self-regulation are healthier people. And they decided that that would hold down their costs in the long run. So they funded the training of over 500 educators in our region in the PACS Good Behavior game. So now the PACS Good Behavior game is in every school district in Jackson and Josephine counties. So that's in education. Restorative justice is also very large in education here. I think there's 14 different schools that have restorative justice programs now, getting very good results in some really kind of hard edge communities like Rogue River is a really impoverished community, but restorative justice has really helped revitalize their high school. Phoenix High School, which has been doing trauma-informed practices probably the longest, they saw their graduation rate go up by 10% last year, and they saw their graduation rate for students with special education go up by 20%. So it's happening in education. Discipline policies are changing in education. The focus is on making connection with students. That's become a priority for most of our school districts. It's working in human services as well. We have an organization called the Maslow Project that works with homeless teens and their families, and they are fully a trauma-informed organization. They've been getting tremendous results with the population that they're working with through the practices that they're using. In fact, their graduation rate for homeless teens is equal to the graduation rate of non-homeless teens in our region. So they do tremendously good work. So all I can really tell you in this long, winding story.
That sounded like a pretty profound statistic. Their graduation rate for homeless teens was higher?
It was equal. It was equal to. It was 80%, Bedford School District, 80% for all students, 80% for the homeless teens. And I think this year, I think in 2019, I think they're even higher than that. I think they're in the 90 percentile with the clientele they're working with.
That's awesome.
So it's been a wild ride. It keeps expanding. And the kind of basis for this work through ACE interface is called the self-healing community approach. And if you do any research on the self-healing community, there was a report given to the Robert Woods Johnson Foundation in June of 2016, which documents the work in the state of Washington. So really as a kind of a primer for how to use ACEs and resilience in a community, the self-healing community effort gives a great kind of example of different paths to go down. The main components of it are leadership expansion, that people need to take the information and then step forward. You don't have to be appointed or elected for it. The work has to focus on issues that matter to that community. It can't be given an issue. It has to matter to that community. There has to be shared learning involved and result-oriented decisions, which just means if something's working, do more of that. If it's not working, do something else. But always keep your eye on the prize. How are you building resilience in the children and the families and the communities you're working with? So with that, that's a Reader's Digest condensed version of the last 3.5 years. And I'd be happy to answer any questions or discuss any of this. I know I covered a lot pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think quite a few people have joined the call. So for those that have not introduced themselves, if you have a question, just please say your name, what your role is, and what city and state or even country you're in. And yeah, I think if people have questions, they could jump on. I have a couple of clarifying questions, but we can start that now. Anyone want to ask a question to begin? Peter, well, I'll start. You spoke a little bit about funding, you know, because creating such a movement takes a lot of time and support. And so I think you shared that one organization like the Health Initiative saw that there was a connection with health and the wellness of kids, and they funded some parts of that. But how do people go about like funding these kind of initiatives?
Well, for our initiative, the funding is coming from the members of this collaboration of Southern Oregon Success. So we are getting funding from the coordinated care organizations, the Medicaid organizations in our region. We're also getting funding from the school districts. The school districts put money through the Education Service District, and they determine where they want the dollars spent. And the school districts want dollars spent on this effort. They seem to understand very clearly that it's not just about behavior in the classroom. It's not just about what happens during the school day. There has to be a community-wide effort if they're going to succeed. So it's really interesting how different it was. You know, even 10 years ago, it was hard to get school districts to engage in these conversations here in Southern Oregon. Now they are initiating the conversations, and they're the ones coming up and saying, you know, tell us more about restorative justice. Give us another idea. So they're helping to fund. And one of our mental health providers, Options in Southern Oregon, is also helping to fund.
Great. And you hinted a little bit that this has been like a 10-year movement in the community, that
Right.
like, there was some resistance before that. I think some
Yeah.
people encounter that because it's a paradigm shift, right? And do
It
you
is a
see
paradigm
that
shift.
in the legislation or in different areas? Is there resistance, and how do you handle that?
You know, there was resistance in the legislature just because there was just a lack of knowledge. You know, people didn't understand what was being discussed, and so you know, a lot of the steps forward were tiny. They were like, let's do a pilot project so people can understand what this might mean. So like 2 high schools did a pilot project funded by the legislature. So, but as understanding has grown, the legislature in Oregon has been really supportive as the understanding has grown to the point now where they passed the Student Success Act in the last session, which is going to significantly increase funding for K-12 and for early childhood programs in the state of Oregon. And they designed the bill so that districts have flexibility to be able to invest in trauma-informed programs, to invest in having additional mental health personnel on campus. So they're really kind of embracing this idea of saying, if a district wants to move in this direction, they want to be able to supply the resources for them to do so. So that's been positive. It has taken about a decade here. It initially started by just bringing in some guest speakers. Ross Green was here, who wrote Lost at School. He gave a very popular presentation. Bruce Perry was here over 10 years ago. Also gave a very popular presentation, and a small group of mostly healthcare folks had a kind of ad hoc work group trying to figure out how do trauma-informed practices how does an understanding start to grow. And it was that work group that convinced the healthcare organizations to contract with ACE Interface. So that's how that developed. It was actually a very small group of people that got this moving.
Great. So, and sometimes we think we have to wait for the principal, or we have to wait for someone who's in charge to make that change. But what it sounds like is you can find people who have a similar mindset to you and know that this is good work, and you start that work group, and then that influence builds.
That's exactly how it's happened here. Absolutely.
Okay. Anyone else have questions out there that we're listening to, or anyone want to introduce themselves and share work that they're doing and how this might relate or what might be coming up for?
Okay, I'm Claudia. I'm from Cape Town, South Africa, and I'm currently working with an organization in quite probably one of the most violent areas around Cape Town. Very poor, very gang related, lots of murders and killings. And I have trained about 34 educare teachers, preschool teachers, and I've just finished a 6-day session with 12 unemployed mothers who's in the community. I have, out of my own, took the ACE questionnaire, and especially for the mothers, I've changed it quite a bit. I've listened to what Bruce Perry said, and I've added in elements like how old were you when this happened, and were there any support, and what was the effect on you? And I'm at the moment working out a spreadsheet to look at the scoring and see if the training that I've done with them now, which was obviously at a lower level than for the educators, and with support, say 6 months from now, how that will not eradicate the ACEs that they've been through, but the effect that it's had to measure if you have that kind of support now. And yesterday we've had a session, and what was quite significant for me is their ability, because I focused a lot on the element of safety in trauma-informed, and their ability to say, I have decided that the people in my circle around me is not safe for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because in that community in particular, there are schools that we want to target, but we also thought that after what we've heard from the preschool educators, that it's very important to target the moms first, and see the impact that we can make there. And in fact, I was actually quite surprised that these mothers that I've worked with, most of them have taken to this much better than the preschool teachers.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually quite surprised.
And do you see any movement there within legislation in South Africa or in the healthcare industry to acknowledge the impact of trauma and to address
You know, slowly, very slowly. I mean, it's in infant stages. There's people that's starting to make the same noises. I mean, I've connected up with that green string, and through them, I've now connected with a lady that works at the Institute for Justice and something, and they are having started discussions around mental health and trauma, and why is that not a public health issue here already? So there's small discussions that's starting already.
And I hope this example that Peter shares about how it can become like a full community movement, and the players that it takes could be helpful.
I know that our province that we stay in here, the Western Cape province, the education department recently had a tender out for trauma-informed schools training. But what was quite interesting to me is they want to dictate what must be in the training. Mm-hmm. And I mean, no one in the education department is trying to do the training. Mm-hmm. But that's our government here. They put out tenders, but then they want to tell you what you must train.
Yeah, and it comes, as I heard from Peter, it comes from the community. Well, thank you for sharing. We're so glad you're on the call, Claudia, even if the time zone is probably not as forgiving. So.
Yeah, it's almost 12 o'clock at night here.
Well, we're happy to have you here. So, yeah. Anyone else have questions for Peter, or maybe some examples of that connection with collaborating with different agencies in your community? Well, we've got some new people to call. I see Kathy is here, and I see Jennifer here as well, and Meryl. So welcome to the call. Peter, maybe if you could just share, I know you've shared like how this movement has taken place. Do you have some examples of like reactions from people within the community and how it's changed with your direct work? I know you reach out to a diverse group, whether it's police officers or families and things.
Very much so. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the most fun has been working with school bus drivers. They have those sessions are always kind of loud and raucous sessions because almost none of them had ever heard of anything about ACEs or trauma, and it makes so much sense to them, and they're so excited to know that actually their job, their role of seeing the child first thing in the morning on the way to school and seeing the child the last thing, after the school day is over, is incredibly important. That they are really important to that child, and the connection that they make with the kids on their bus is really important to those children learning resilience. So that has been a blast. That's been a lot of fun working with them. The healthcare community overall, interesting enough, the pediatricians are, of course, very excited and very innovative with some of the things that they're doing. But the kind of traditional doctor's office personnel, the staff get excited, but the doctors themselves kind of discount the information about ACEs and trauma. They kind of basically say, hey, if it was this important, I would have learned it in medical school. And even when you say, this is a 1998 study, I don't know when you went to medical school, but you should have learned this in medical school, but you didn't. They're a little bit more challenging for us to get traction with. Public safety folks have been really wide open for this. Another example of making changes, the jail operation here in our county, they used to release people at 2 a.m. If their sentence was up at 2 a.m, they would just send them out the door at 2 o'clock in the morning. They felt it wasn't their job what happened to that person after they left the jail. But now, after getting this information, understand how important it is to actually care for each other, actually provide safety as a community value, building resilience. They have people leave the jail at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they actually bus them to a resource center in downtown Medford, where the person coming out of jail can get coffee, get some food, get signed up for housing if they don't have housing, get signed up for health care. So that's been a major shift within the public safety folks, and that's been really interesting to watch as well.
And that was directly impacted by your training? Or?
Yes. Yep.
Wonderful.
How long is a reasonable time for, in this project that I'm assisting in this area, the project coordinator, she comes from this area, and she's been working with this organization for probably about 5 years, but the trauma training is new. It's a year that she's been involved, and she's done some Montessori training in the meantime as well. But there's a pattern in her, because she comes from the community, and her own son has been shot recently, where survival brain kicks in, and then she shuts down, and she almost like disappears, and then she doesn't contact her boss, which is the director of this organization, like this week that we're in now. She hasn't made contact with Leanne for 4 days, and there's actually a disciplinary pending tomorrow, because Leanne's reaction is, well, yeah, I hear about the trauma, but surely with our relationship, she could just have sent me a message. And I'm thinking, because I'm now doing the training, how long is a reasonable enough time, because people process this differently, and this community is so violent driven, that one can actually expect of her to think, okay, I should have contacted my boss to say I'm incapacitated for the next 4 days.
So
Well,
the question is, go ahead, Peter. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, you're dealing with situations that are so much more challenging than the situations I'm dealing with the level of violence that's in your community. It's a challenge, no matter how you operate. It's a challenge to hold people to standards. Even though they've been traumatized, you can't drop the standards of which your organization or community has agreed to. That's important to do. We have to try to help people learn the skills of how to keep those agreements. If it's a lack of skill, or just a lack of, that person never has had the experience of keeping those kind of agreements, I think we have to help them to do that. But I think they also have to take, control themselves as well.
It's a hard question. Like I think it comes down a lot that we come to terms with, that once we train people in trauma and they understand that trauma impacts behavior, how do we continue to maintain high expectations but still have compassion, right? And some of our systems that have been created haven't had that compassion for people impacted by trauma. right? And so you're talking about shifts within like, you know, the jails and things like that that are small and concrete, but I'm sure there's many more shifts you would like to see happen, right?
Absolutely.
And some of it is that we have to sit with that, right? And celebrate those small successes. Maybe, you know, and maybe Claudia, the employer that you're working with, when they see that they have an employee who's been impacted by trauma, they still have those high expectations, but hopefully they're approaching that person differently than they would have before they had these trainings. Do you think that they are? Like,
I think that Leanne is thinking that because their relationship has been coming for 6 years already, that the employee should have responded differently. And I'm saying to her, I understand what you're saying, and she has to be held accountable for the fact that she's not made contact this week. However, when you're in your survival brain and your nervous system takes over, you are actually not in control of what you're doing. And she needs to be helped through that. But I don't think to fire is the answer.
Yeah, thank you for your advocacy. And it does take time. We want to see huge changes, and sometimes we just have to focus on those changes, like the shift in time when they release somebody from jail, and then the bigger changes will come, right? Like those are already the big accomplishments, right?
And there's a proposal to build a new jail here in our county. And it's interesting to see how that discussion has evolved from originally it was surrounded with a lot of fear around it. We need to build a new jail because there's too much crime, there's too many people on the streets. But the discussion has evolved now to saying, why are there people on the streets? Why do we have the crime that we have? Why do we have the problems with drugs that we have? So that's been a positive, to at least to change that discussion to, is this facility going to be just an incarceration facility? Or is this a facility going to be a treatment facility? And hopefully that will be a systematic change that we can get done.
Absolutely. I've been hearing about the work in Norway with their prisons,
Yes.
and the decrease in the recidivism, however you say that word, rate. And it's been pretty incredible. And
It is.
So I'm glad that discussion is coming. Yeah, so any other questions from folks? Peter, what do you see as your next step? So you've probably trained thousands of people at this point, built awareness around the impact of trauma on themselves and on
Right.
those they're working with. What are you hoping for as your next steps? Or
well, we're continuing to try to support the kind of organic growth that happens in the self-healing community by staying in touch with different organizations that we've done trainings with, and asking, what do you need next? Do you need more information? Do you need an introduction to the folks who do restorative justice? But we've also developed a workshop in self-regulation and resilience out of the request that's come from many of the, particularly the elementary school teachers who have been given this information, and they're telling us back that they're seeing more traumatized children every year. More kids lacking the ability to be safely in the classroom. Those numbers are increasing consistently. One local teacher even calls them feral children. She said, I had 7 feral children in my kindergarten class who simply could not safely be in the classroom without hurting other people. So we're starting to look at that as a priority issue. We've developed a workshop in self-regulation skills for adults, so adults can be as masterful at self-regulation as possible, and help them to understand what's happening to this generation of young people right now, which is, at least in America, has the largest number of diagnosed cases of anxiety and depression of any generation in American history. The American Psychological Association goes back to 1939 with their studies, and they say this is the most anxious and depressed generation in our history. So we're trying to delve into that. Why is that happening? What exactly are the factors that's leading to this teen suicide rate that we experience, the suicide rate overall that we experience? Why is our country going crazy with these mass shootings? on a regular basis? What is it that's happening in terms of our ability to self-regulate in a positive way? So that's where we're focused on over the next years, to really see, can we make headway in teaching self-regulation skills? Can we kind of raise awareness of what's happening to our kids and our families and our communities? And can we kind of change the tide? Because right now, many people just feel that things are out of control in our country. And I think that there's a desire to try to find a way to change that tide, so we get back to taking care of each other and take care of our communities.
Absolutely. Beautifully stated. I just listened to Dr. Esther Sternberg, and she was saying, she studies stress, and she was saying that when you experience change, you get a higher stress response. Like if a mouse goes into a field they've never been in, their stress response is higher because they don't know the unpredictable things that they'll experience.
Right.
And I think when we are in a time in our society that we're experiencing so many rapid changes in technology, and just our society is changing all the time, that our level of stress response is consistently high just because there's change.
Yep.
And just knowing that kind of undermines our ability to cope sometimes, and that we do need to lean on each other more than we realize. So
absolutely.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, well, we're so glad to have everyone on this call. And it's really exciting to have somebody who has that different perspective. Like a lot of time we talk with people within education, but looking at how education can collaborate with different agencies and how our government comes into play. Maybe for the last few minutes, if anybody doesn't jump in, just the process of like having a bill come in. Like I know in Oregon bills are starting, but I don't know in other states if bills have been implemented. Maybe
it's actually pretty exciting. There are trauma-informed movements in almost every state in our country right now. And there is trauma-informed legislative proposals going forward in almost every legislative body in the country. In fact, for the United States Congress, which is so famously bitterly divided right now, the one bill they passed unanimously in 2016 or 2017 was a bill requiring federal agencies to look into trauma-informed practices in their work.
Wow.
So it's starting to become on the legislative side, on the government side, it's starting to become much more part of the discussion. Major legislation that was helped passed by Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon has put funding into place. It's not a huge amount of funding, but funding for trauma-informed practices in communities. So it's starting to get noticed at the federal level and at the state level. It's just essential. And again, what's positive about it, it's not a partisan issue. The former First Lady of Wisconsin, and Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker was a Republican. She's been one of the strongest advocates in our country for trauma-informed practices. She's appeared before the United States Congress numerous times. So Republicans, Democrats, it's something that has a common ground to it, because it's about all of us. And doesn't matter what your political affiliation is. We all do better if our kids do better. We all do better if there's less drug use that has come from trauma and isolation, etc. So I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful for the future that this could actually be an area that could be emphasized even in a divisive political time. That we could actually use this information to help bring people together to actually make steps forward.
Absolutely. I feel the same way, and I really appreciate you sharing those examples. I hadn't even thought of the fact that this is a unifying movement in a time of so much political toxicity, so that's great. Well, if anyone else has any questions, I'll open the floor to you guys, and otherwise you can.
I'd love to hear what people's work is, what other people are working on, if people are up for sharing.
Yeah. People like to share what their role is and some of the projects that they've been working on in trauma-informed work, or projects that they're hoping to do.
Like Meryl's.
Okay, Meryl, you want to share?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. I could see you before, but I cannot see you now.
Okay, so this is my first time using Zoom on my phone, so I'm stumbling a little bit. Well, first I want to say, Peter, you make me feel so hopeful, because I am coming from a position that totally burnt me out. I left a big school district and was kind of on this trauma-informed mission myself. Last year, the school district trained, I think 14 of us. We did a 4-week St. A's training,
Nice.
4-day. And then we were supposed to train the entire school district. So anyone who came out or who began employment after the start of the school year still went through the exact same training. But it was just scratching the surface, and it was, leaving people almost frustrated because it wasn't enough. They want more specific skills, more things to do, and it felt like, too theoretical. And so I always, was coming from this place, well, there's not much implementation happening of trauma-informed practices. The knowledge is there, but the implementation wasn't. And just hearing, all these wonderful things that you're saying about the bus drivers being empowered, it just makes me feel hopeful and kind of refreshed on this mission. So yeah, I'm collaborating with Emily and taking her course and figuring out how to just take this to the next level in our local communities as well.
Very nice. If you get a chance, there's a group out of Seattle called Sound Discipline, and the positive discipline curriculum that they have is very detailed. So if there's any teachers that basically say, I don't know how to implement this in my classroom, positive discipline is basically, it has a teacher's guide from the before school starts, your first week of school, all the way through the school year, of how to actually create that classroom community. They use the principles of restorative justice and positive discipline as well. It's really quite fascinating.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that. I went to their training this summer, and I feel like positive discipline is a lot more accessible for classroom teachers than restorative practices is.
Right.
And I think that, at least in Medford, very few people actually were able to go to the 4-day restorative practice training. So they were kind of, it was a really, really messy implementation.
Gotcha.
And so I feel like positive discipline is so much more accessible and easier for teachers to do. And I'm really pleased that our Educators Association is offering that free training.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing, Meryl.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to share what they're up to in their work? Winston, I'm going to call you out because we haven't checked in a while, but you're a school psychologist in the Bay Area. I don't know if you want to share the impact of, I think you're the only school psychologist on the call besides myself, but if you want to say hi or share that.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, we've been kind of dealing with some technical challenges, and I'm kind of doing multitasking here. I apologize. So I'm trying to figure out some of our equipment here to do our IQ testing. But if you repeat the question, I'm sure I can.
Sure. I was just, people are sharing the work they're doing, and I wondered in the Bay Area about like kind of the trauma-informed movement and being a school psychologist.
It's definitely something that I know a couple of our colleagues here are actually, their goals are to be a little more trauma-informed, especially because we do run a counseling-rich course, or we have a number of classrooms that specifically work with students who have experience or are going through trauma themselves, and also informing teachers how to approach them, and taking different alternative forms of discipline as well. I know there's a very large push for restorative practices here, and using, in conjunction with a number of like PBIS, I guess, approaches in how to deal with behaviors. And so far we've already been seeing massive drop in suspensions, and have been seeing a lot of positive, increase in. I am new to this district, but in general to the field, that's kind of the direction we're going. I know a lot of it is endorsed through our national body, the NAS, National Association for School Psychologists, and also more local in the California Association of School Psychologists, very much endorse a lot of the being, or at least having clinicians to be a little more trauma informed in their practices, because we do a lot of consultation with a lot of the staff who don't have a lot of exposure to children but have the limited training.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
So starting with the awareness. Thank you, Winston. All right, well, it's just been great to have so many different people from different places on the call. Peter, I really think you leave us with a lot of hope, and just great examples. I also like hearing about like the big role that the medical field plays in this movement. And just figuring out how do we collaborate with those agencies within our own communities is important.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you all for being part of the call. I think I'm going to stick around for a few minutes if people have any questions about the program. We're going to be starting up again in September. So if people want to stick around, I'm going to stop the recording now, though.